Regaining spiritual focus. When we feel alone and isolated, we should refocus our thoughts on who God is and what He wants to do for us when we trust Him. Here's Dr. Gene Getz to explain this principle.
Let me just share one verse here that helps to focus this principle. Chapter 22, verse 1. So David left Gath, and he took refuge in the cave Adullam. You see, David even had to flee from the king of Achish because he wasn't welcome there. And so he has to leave that situation, and he went to the cave of Adullam, which was located somewhere close to the valley of Elah, which is interesting. This is where he actually took on Goliath. And I'm sure being in that cave and reflecting, he was able to think about what happened that day when he went out and was victorious. But he's alone in the cave of Adullam. But this next statement, I think, is very significant. When David's brothers and his father's whole family heard, they went down and joined him there. Now, how they discovered that he was in that particular cave, I don't know. But his family went down and joined him there. Now, in that cave, and as a result of his family coming, many believe that he penned Psalm 34 because some things happened in his life. He regained his spiritual focus. Look at these verses from this particular psalm. Verse 4, Psalm 34, I sought the Lord, and He answered me and delivered me from all my fears. I mean, David was captivated by fear. But somehow in that situation, he cried out to God, and God delivered him from his fear. Verse 6, this poor man cried. He recognized his need for God. This poor man cried, and the Lord heard him and saved him from all his troubles. This was his witness, his testimony as he refocused on God. Psalm 34:8, taste and see the Lord is good. How happy is the man that takes refuge in Him. In other words, David learned a tremendous lesson through this, and he's sharing it with others. Who is the man who delights in life, loving a long life to enjoy what is good? Keep your tongue from evil and your lips from what? Deceitful speech. He's talking about himself because he was engaging in deceitful speech. When he lied, when he feigned insanity, and he says, God literally delivered me from that kind of behavior. And there's a beautiful principle that emerges right from this particular psalm. And here is the principle. No matter how foolish we've acted, and believe me, David acted like a fool when he feigned insanity. No matter how foolish we've acted, we must trust God to restore us and never to forsake us. And that's one of the beautiful things about regaining our spiritual focus. And that leads to the reflection and response question, which simply reads, why is being alone helpful at times, but when can it also be detrimental to our spiritual growth? Now, there's a verse of Scripture I'd like to just share with you here, 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 26. And it has to do with relationships of all kinds, in all kinds of situations. And Paul wrote, so if one member suffers, using the analogy of a member of the body, if one member suffers, all the members suffer with it. If one member is honored, all the members rejoice with it. He's used the illustration of the human body that when one member is suffering, it affects the whole body. But when we're feeling good all over, we feel good and we rejoice. And he says, so it is within the body of Jesus. And so here you have the concept of mutual support. And I think it's really significant, and you can miss this, that out of this aloneness, when he was hiding in that cave, came his family. There's relationships. There's support. There's help. There's encouragement. You see, aloneness can be good in the sense it helps us to avoid distractions and to clear our minds. Sometimes. But if we're not careful, isolation can also accentuate the problem. Isolation can accentuate the problem of fear, the problem of paranoia, because we're so wrapped up in ourselves that we can't see the forest for the trees, using that analogy. And so God's plan is relationships. Yes, aloneness, God can use that. But on the other hand, to come out of that aloneness and that distorted thinking, it takes other members of the body of Jesus Christ. In this case, it was David's family, his brothers, who came to him in a time of fear, encouraged him, and helped him to regain his spiritual focus. As I was reflecting on this, I remember a time in my own life where I was going through some incredible disillusionment. As a young man, I was single at the time, ministering in another city. And I became so disappointed in taking my eyes off of Jesus and seeing different Christians and their lifestyles and things that they were doing that disillusioned me as a young Christian, as a young person just becoming involved in ministry. And I went into a horrible state of depression, of disillusionment, of fear, and I was at the time living by myself. And I remember there were times when I tried to pray and I couldn't get beyond the ceiling. I would read the Psalms of David, and somehow it was just like the words of David and his reassuring words would bounce off the walls. It didn't seem to go beyond the walls. And then the Lord brought into my life that summer a young man from Wheaton College who, his name was David Cousins, and he was an assistant coach to Gil Dodds, who at one time held the indoor world record for running the track and for racing. And he was a strong Christian, and God brought him into my life. We began to fellowship, and I remember that was the beginning of light, the clouds beginning to dissipate, because I was no longer alone. I had someone to talk to, someone to interact with, which gave me perspective. And that can happen to any one of us. When we go alone, in the cave, as it were, we need family. And that family, according to the will of God, is the body of Jesus Christ. And we need other people in our life to help us to regain focus. So that's a very important concept to keep in mind. Let me just restate the principle. When we feel alone and isolated, we should refocus our thoughts on who God is and what He wants to do for us when we trust Him. Yes, but we could add to that we need others in our lives to help us to refocus on God.